Alrighty, so our first work of art is going to be by the artist Moses Sumney. You've been listening to my podcast. I'm sure you've heard that name before. There, he has a lot of art that I reference. He's one of my favorite artists, and especially whenever it comes to conversations about identity, his album that he released called Gray back in 2020 has so many songs on there that sort of discusses identity, and so whenever identity sort of comes up, I find myself going back to his project. And so, surprise, surprise, I'm talking about it today. And so I'm going to be talking about the song also, and. It's a really, really dope song. Well, it's more of a like a interlude, sort of like spoken word track, but it's done really, really well. And I want to read it for you today. I will recommend you go listen to the project in its entirety if it's something you would like to do. But if you only need to understand the reference for today's episode, this track isn't very long, and so I recommend you go listen to the track so you can get the total experience. Yeah, so here goes. I insist upon my right to be multiple. I insist upon my right to be multiple. Even more so, I insist upon the recognition of my multiplicity. All things encompassed in one. I really do insist that others recognize my inherent multiplicity. What I no longer do is take pains to explain it or defend it. That is an exhausting, repetitive, and draining project to constantly explain and defend one's multiplicity. So I've reached the point where I am aware of my inherent multiplicity, and anyone wishing to meaningfully engage with me or my work must be too. It can also, and. So that's also, and. And I thought this song in particular was going to be really pertinent for today's conversation because it is explicitly talking about the idea of multiplicity and existing and not being defined or confined to any one reality that society may sort of expect you to hold. It's very important that we sort of acknowledge this reality because not doing so can be detrimental, honestly. And I would say detrimental to your health and not even just physical health, but like your mental health. And I don't know, I thought it was a really powerful project and this was a really powerful track and it's necessary for today's conversation. And so I want to hop into the next song that I want to use for today's conversation so that we can hurry up and get to the conversation because I think I have a not even I think I have a lot to say. So let's do that. For our next work of art, I'm going to be using this title track from Chlothegod's "I Feel Different Every Day" album that came out in 2025. Now, this is absolutely so. I'm talking about the deluxe version of the album. That's my favorite version of the project. There is a regular version. I really enjoyed the deluxe version, but this is one of my favorite projects from last year, and this particular song, definitely helped boost it for me. Like, this is one of my favorite songs, and I find myself listening to it a lot because it is very relatable. Um, and so, like, the chorus goes, "What do I know? I feel different every day." And throughout the song, he's sort of talking about just what it was like kind of existing and growing up and sort of being a person and experiencing life. There's some focal points in the song that really resonates with me, especially for someone who's sort of on this journey or coming to this realization that like there is no one self I can be that like are kind of she kind of touches on here. Um and it's not directly related to the conversation, but for me it is directly related. In verse 2, she says, always struggled with addiction. I need real redemptions, a lifetime doing dishes, deleting pictures because something's missing. Anybody hear me? And does it even matter? I've been drowning in my pity. I'll deal with that later. And so this verse is very prevalent. It's going to be very prevalent when it comes to today's conversation because in the drive for trying to exist or find out who you are, and by being like that one thing that society sort of tells you you have to be, like you have to choose one, you find yourself going through what people would consider phases, and you always feel like something's missing, and so you're deleting or removing reminders of versions of yourself or these phases of yourself that the real you anymore. So you're struggling with your identity. You're not even sure if any of what you're doing even matters, and you feel bad about yourself. You do. And that's what, because it feels like it's not enough. And that's the sad part about trying to exist in a world that tells you to exist one way when you feel compelled to exist another. All right. And then verse 3 for this in this song that I'm going to talk about in today's conversation as well goes, I've always got my panties in a twist, standing in the corner with my hand balled in a fist. I'm a slave to the disorder. Got a tightness in my chest, it's all on my lips, consumed and overwhelmed by the burden of this guilt. Scratch that, it was never my fault at all. Hindsight, I was always designed to fall. I backpack with the weight of the world and all the people who've let me down. Then the bridge that goes, where's my guardian angel? Where's my seat at the table? Where's my gratification? I've been so calm, I've been patient. And then, of course, our chorus, what do I know? I feel different every day. And it's just, this is a such a great track. Love this track. And it means a lot to me. And it's going to mean a lot for today's conversation because the idea of us having to exist in this singular identity didn't exactly spring from nowhere, and it absolutely like affects the way you move throughout the world. It affects how you carry yourself. It affects how you see those around you and how you engage because you are expecting to engage in another very specific way. And so with that being said, let's hop right into today's conversation. Alrighty. So for today's conversation, I really wanted to talk about the idea of existing in your multiplicity. So today's society, especially, we are expected to live and abide by one sort of path. Like, and honestly, it's so ingrained in us. It's the expectation of being one thing is instilled in us even when we're toddlers. Like, soon as when you're really little, it's like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Not like what are all the things you want to be or what are all of these ideas you have of like what happy life would look like for you. It's this idea of like what do you want to be and then how to get you to that one thing. And it's it can get suffocating because using myself as an example growing up, I felt like I was performing probably like almost my entire life because I mentioned at one point being a lawyer when I was very little. And then even though like my mind sort of changed about that as I got older, I didn't actually explore anything outside being a lawyer or being something doing something attached to law until I got to college. And so like that was me in 3rd grade all the way up until college because I was like, well, I said I was going to be this, and everyone said I should go ahead and be this. And there's a lot of positive reinforcement around me being this. And so now I feel like I have to do this. I feel like I have to pursue this path, even if I actually was like, maybe I'd rather do something a bit more creative, or maybe I'd rather do something that would make me happier, that wouldn't surround me with like paperwork. constant like paperwork. And yeah, so it's just like, and it's not even that I don't like aspects of law anymore, but kind of a lot like in the I feel different every day. Growing up, I didn't actually feel like I had the choice to change or to exist in a way that wasn't perceived by people previously. And so it's like I wanted to feel and be different, but I never felt like I had the permission to do so. And that was sort of a feeling I really resonated with me with the verse 3 from I Feel Different Every Day. The lyric, I've always got my pennies in a twist, standing in a corner with my hand balled in a fist. I'm a slave to the disorder. The tightness in my chest, it's all on my lips, consumed and overwhelmed by the burden of this guilt. Because for a very long time, I actually did feel guilty about no longer wanting to do something. I told a lot of people that I was going to do, and so I would continue to pursue that thing, even though I was just like, I actually don't feel happy doing this anymore. Like, this isn't something that brings me joy. But I told them that I was going to do this, and I feel like I'd be robbing them of experiencing me as this thing if I do not continue to pursue that. And so for a very long time growing up, I felt guilty for not wanting to do things anymore, even though I had mentioned wanting to do them at one point in my life. And that is a very, very suffocating feeling. And it doesn't help when you exist in a society that tells you you can only be one thing, that like you have to get do this thing and then that becomes all who you are for the rest of your life. And so growing up or becoming an adult and realizing that, oh, I do not have to only exist as this one thing, that I am allowed to exist in my multiplicity. In fact, I have to insist on existing in my multiplicity, that like living became more bearable. And so it's very, very like, it was very eye opening, especially when I was listening to that track by Moses Sumney. Like when I first listened to it, I was like, oh, this resonates so deeply. I have to insist upon being multiple. I have to, and not even just have to insist on being multiple, but I also have to move in the way that like the people who wish to meaningfully engage with me or the things that I enjoy or my work also have to be aware of that inherent multiplicity. Like there is no going back for me to being some single vision, some tunnel vision person. Like there's no going back. I exist in my multiplicity, and not only do I exist in this multiplicity, but anyone who wishes to engage with me or be in community with me also has to acknowledge and be aware of my multiplicity. Because in Clothegod song, another part of verse 3 that resonated with me was also the my backpack with the weight of the world and all the people who've let me down. Because this sort of thing doesn't happen in isolation. And as a child, I do feel like I was let down. But as an adult, I can recognize that existing in a system with people who also existed in said system and didn't know how to exist out of that system. So it would have been really hard for them to show me or tell me anything different, but just because it it wasn't in their capacity per se, I do like as a adult I do still feel like as a kid I was let down. And I think that is a major component when it comes to trying to figure out who you are, especially when there are people who are telling you who you should and you have to be. And you don't even realize it, that them insisting on this singularity of existence for you might be deterring you from something that you're actually meant to be doing and something you've always dreamed of doing. But you're you're terrified of letting them down, or you feel guilty about potentially letting them down. And that alone is eating you up. And it's just a lot to experience as a person, in all honesty. Like, it's just a lot. I do think it is easy to get lost with this idea of no longer mattering because you've not been able to find what your unquote purpose is. Because I feel like that more or less falls into the idea of existing in almost like this tunnel vision. So often people want to exist and aim and go for this single thing that you feel like you're supposed to be doing with your life, like whatever your life is. And in trying to create this life purpose for yourself, you are stifling and suffocating yourself being able to exist in the multitude and in the multiplicity because you start to sort of deny yourself anything that exists outside what you've decided your purpose is, and things outside of that purpose often kind of what can help keep us afloat. You don't want to get burnt out living, and oftentimes this idea of this single thing you have to do, living this very specific way, is what will eventually deter you from wanting to continue to pursue said thing. And so, even in existing in my multiplicity now, like if I had to say my purpose was anything, any and everything I do is always purposefully left in like as broad of a description as possible so that I give myself the freedom to exist in all the ways that I desire to exist and still do something that would make me happy. So, for example, if now at my big age, if I was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? My go to answers are kind. I want to be kind, or I want to be happy. And because it is possible for me to do those things in all variations of whoever it is I decide to be and whatever it is I decide to be, versus making it my life's mission to do one thing and then doing that thing and finding out that that thing doesn't actually make me happy for very long, and then feeling absolutely terrible that I'm now jaded and upset and I can't stand going to work, or I can't stand doing this thing that at one point I thought would bring me joy, enough joy for a lifetime. Because life changes, you change, you grow, you exist, and the version of you that exists now is not the version of you that exists 2 days ago, let alone even 20 minutes ago, really. The version of you that exists with all the knowledge that you've accumulated up until this point, and that person might not even like the same things you did. That person might have learned some new information regarding a topic, and so their whole outlook and perspective on how to view the world is entirely different at this point. And that is okay. And that is the beauty of living in your multiplicity, is that like you're allowed to grow and change. In fact, I feel like if you live in your multiplicity, growing and changing is expected. And the ability and permission to continue to exist in that way is inherent when you are living in this multiplicity. It's rather very important, actually, that we keep in mind that not everything has to be like, you don't have to be one track minded to live this life and to be happy. Society tells us we have to go from point A to point B, from point B to point C, from point C to point D. And you have to hit every single one of these steps in between in order to be happy. And that is simply not true. You are allowed to exist in your multiplicity and be happy and not have to suffocate and stifle yourself for the sake of what other people might think. Because listen, I've been there, done that. is not. So maybe, just maybe, living, loving, existing in your multiplicity can be an art like everything else. Alrighty, and last and certainly not least is this week's awe moment. So for this week's awe moment, I'm going to be talking about a short film called Model Citizen. So this is a dystopian animated short film released by Dead Sound, a YouTube channel on YouTube. So this project was released back in 2020. It's only 5 minutes long if you'd like to go see it. But this was a really, really good short film, and it more or less reminded me of today's topic about this idea, like this life cycle of existence that is expected by society, and that like you do you exist as a child. You from after a child, you become a parent, you get a job, you work, you come home, you take care of your family. After you've done that, after you've raised your child, then you sort of more or less become obsolete and unnecessary. And you see how it works. Honestly, if you've read the book The Giver, this actually reminds me a lot about that. Like if you if it was more or less like a animated version of The Giver, like this short film reminds me of. In that like your life cycle just like that, it's a cycle. Like there's no expectation of non-conformity, and that like you not conforming to what they tell you to conform to is foreseen as terrible. And so like the short film, it follows follows uh follows a father and a mother who's raising a son until he becomes an adult, and then they're just they're constantly talked about how much of a model family they are, and you see them more or less kind of going through the motions and the expectations of them throughout this short film, and making it all the way to the end, and not necessarily like deterring or deferring um, what is expected of them. And it's really fascinating to see because you hear in the background also like the robot sort of talking about, hey, y'all are like the perfect model family, and the uh, like your existence keeps the cycle going, and you and it's like more or less it's really, really, really dopely shot. In that like that sort of monologue you hear the robot talking about kind of transitions into like the cartoon of a child watching that's like going to grow up inside of this same exact system. So like nothing's actually changing. And so I always find it fascinating how that's how it often feels in the real world. It's like, oh, you're expected to exist a very specific way, and if you don't fall in line, you're often ostracized. And so see that with so many different marginalized communities who are thrown to the wayside when they are not fitting within these very specific boxes placed and put out by society. Then people who are fitting into those boxes are often trying to integrate and attack those who do exist outside of these boxes because like why aren't you fitting in these boxes, why aren't you conforming, why aren't you trying to be like me, is able to fit into this box, who is able to exist in this reality. And it's like, I don't want to have to do that. I just want to be able to exist and be happy and choose to do the things I want to do and not feel bad about that. Not feel like I have to do what you're telling me or I will not be happy. Because it's soul sucking. And I don't know, this was a very good short film. It's only 5 minutes. Like I said, I highly recommend you watch it. I'm going to have the link in the description and definitely go check it out. If you would like to follow for more, feel free to do that. I highly encourage you to do that. I'm very, very happy that you all are here and that you all are with me watching this, listening to this. It means a lot to me, especially now that I'm like on maybe year 4 of doing this podcast because I've I had been thinking and considering about doing something like this for a very long time, and so it's really cool to see how far I've come after finally like putting myself out there, and that's really really cool. Yeah, free to follow me on my personal Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter at the Lovely Infinite. So it's lovely without the vowels. So that's TheLvlyInfinite. And that'll be on the screen as well for those watching. And then if you'd like to follow our YouTube channel, that's Art Light Podcast Network. Then if you'd like to know even more, follow our other pages. So on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, we are at Like Studios. So for those new here, and this is also still relatively new, I have founded an art collective called the CMP Collective. It's Creativity Maintenance Preservation. It's an art collective that is built around preserving and educating folks about creativity and art, and just getting people to get back into and get into understanding and enjoying and being able to engage in art and the creative field again, because there's been so much dope and cool art that's been created that I feel like not enough people are looking at or watching anymore, and I want to be a part of the change that encourages people to tap into what it is that makes humans better than AI, and that is our ability to create, which I think is so cool. And our ability to experience life through art, which is also very, very cool. So feel free to do that. That is the CMP Collective on TikTok and on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being. Have a great rest of your day. Bye. Cheeto birthday.